The Black-Eyed Children. Infamous urban legends. What do they want? And what will they do to you when they get it? Please join me in welcoming Hellfreezer in our quest to find out. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I was working in Oregon. I worked for a company that handled the customer service member privileges point of sale systems between Planet Fitness, and I was checking in on a few locations. Since Planet Fitness is a 24/7 establishment, I had to cater to all the shifts and would show up to each club multiple times during day or night. One night, approximately 11:30 p.m., I was heading to the PF location in Beavington, Oregon. My rental car had Bluetooth capabilities and was currently playing a Coast to Coast AM episode throughout the car's speaker. This particular episode was a talk about the djinn. I don't know how the topic came on, but I remember that someone brought up the black-eyed kids phenomenon, and the person who was speaking said that it could be related to the djinn. Looking back, that was a serious coincidence, because what happened when I arrived to the club chilled me to the core. I'm a smoker. Nasty habit, but it's my vice. When I arrived at the club, I decided to smoke in the parking lot, with the driver's side window open on my rental, so that I could continue to listen to Coast, and not be in the car because rentals can fine you a couple of $100 for smoking inside. The PF there was an L-shaped strip mall. I don't entirely remember all of the stores in the strip mall, but the Planet Fitness is all the way to the end, and all the way to the left is the pharmacy of some kind. My passenger side was parallel to Planet Fitness, and that was about 30 feet away from a streetlight. The pharmacy was around 75 yards away, and obviously closed. I was leaning against the car smoking, and playing on my phone, looking up at the pharmacy. In the light of the marquee, I could see two people standing outside of it. For it being near midnight, I thought how weird it was to see someone outside an obviously closed pharmacy. But the thought was fleeting, and I was once again down in what was probably a safe bet. After a few seconds I looked up. I noticed these two people. I could now tell that they were kids or teenagers, and they were about 20% closer than before. It struck me as odd. I didn't see them walking to that spot. They were just looking in my general direction. From this distance, I could tell they were both wearing hooded sweatshirts. They were dark in color, and both kids had their hoods up. They were in the area just outside the streetlight glow. It shone on them, but not enough to see very clearly. Looking back, this should have raised some red flags, but I once again was back on my phone. As I was listening to the radio, they were talking about ancient items from the Middle East that seemed to have some kind of evil spirit attached to it. Well, now I glanced back up, and the kids were about 25 to 30 feet closer. They were once again outside the general streetlight glow, but I could see them much clearer. This time, their heads were aimed down. I couldn't see their faces, but I could make out their clothes. One had an olive dab green hooded sweatshirt with no visible markings nor insignia. The hoodie was on the top of what appeared to be a grey ball cap, and once again, with no markings or insignia. The other one dressed very similar, the only difference being navy blue zip-up hoodie, and a hood over what appeared to be a black ball cap, khaki pants, and white shoes. The kids were standing still. I hadn't seen them move to their current location, as they were almost frozen there, not moving at all. I don't know why, but I just went back on my phone, not fazed by it. I got a weird feeling almost instantly. I looked up, and they were there. 5 feet in front of me and not moving closer. I tossed the cigarette butt underneath the car. I asked them if there was anything I could do for them, and then they replied, "Please, kind sir, may we borrow a cigarette? It's very lonely at night. We only need 1 cigarette. Please." After they'd finished speaking in unison, they slowly lifted their heads to show me their faces. I remember thinking it's kind of late for teenagers to be out on a Thursday, and almost as if they'd just plucked that from my head, I heard, "It's quite all right. We have permission." As soon as permission rolled off the second kid's lips, their faces were level with mine, showing me solid, jet black eyes. I froze. My mind was going about 1,000,000 miles a minute, because damn it, I did know what black-eyed kids were. Well, not what they were, but I knew of them. I couldn't move or speak. Their faces were almost the definition of blank, almost because the edges around their slit-straight mouths began to curl ever so slightly. But you could see it. The inside of my stomach began to get colder, and with all my might I tried to turn my face, but I could not. The second kid took a step forward. The movement of shoes caught my eye, and I broke eye contact. I looked down, and the moment my eye contact was broken, everything I knew about black-eyed kid encounters rushed through my head, and I turned around and ran into the club. Now when I say ran, I sprinted in loafers, and all 6'1", 250 pounds of me screamed the whole way. The young kids who worked the counter just stared at me when I came in. I tried my best to explain, but they didn't know about the black-eyed kids. I looked out the window, and they were standing side by side facing the club, motionless. Chills ran down my spine. It almost felt like a dream. I woke up to my dog Lucy barking. She was upright on the bed where my husband and I were sleeping with our 22-month-old daughter, staring at our door like an unknown stranger was out there, rummaging around. I thought she was just freaking out over a house noise. We'd only had her for 3 months, and she was still a puppy. It could have been anything. Our roommate, a creak from the house settling, the awnings moving outside in the breeze. I wasn't too concerned initially. I decided the best thing to do would be to open the door and show her that nothing was there. It sounds a bit silly, but that's what we do with our daughter when she gets scared, and I figured that it would work with the puppy too. I opened the door, and she raced to the front door. She stood there snarling. It was an angry, violent growl, one I had never heard her make before. I looked groggily at her and opened the baby gate blocking the doorway, planning to open the door and show her that everything was okay. The second my hand reached for the deadbolt, Lucy went wild. She started barking and jumped towards me, and when I touched the metal, she suddenly changed her temper. She whimpered, almost like she was afraid and backing down. As her mannerisms changed, so did mine. I wasn't calm anymore. My heart was racing and sinking at the same time. I had been flooded with a mixture of fear and dread. I looked through the peephole. I can't explain why I looked, but I did. Outside were 2 kids. One was only just a smidgen shorter than I, and didn't look much younger. I'm 21, and she looked to be around 16 or 17. She was slender and pale. Her hair was a light shade of honey blonde, and she wore it long, about mid-back with long, thin, blunt bangs in the front that covered most of her eyes. She wore jeans, a light wash that's popular right now, and a thin-looking, olive-coloured pullover-style hoodie. She held the hand of a small girl who looked to be around the age of 4 or 5 in the same style jeans and a button-down ivory cardigan. The smaller one looked at the floor shyly, but had the same shade of hair tied back in a ponytail. She held a stuffed toy under her free arm, and it was identical to one my daughter has, as was the style of dress. Had it not been for the feeling of overwhelming dread and fear, I probably would have asked these children to come in, as well as given them a hot beverage to get them out of the bitter cold. Something about them seemed off. At this point I hadn't made any noise. I hadn't hushed the dog or grumbled. Nothing. I hadn't turned on any lights. Those kids had no indicators that I was at the door. And yet, the older one spoke. She had a voice that was mature, confident, strong, and accentless. She held her head tilted downwards, and I could see her eyes. She said, "We have to use your phone." I stood frozen in fear. How did she know that I was there? She raised her head to face me directly, and that's when I saw her eyes. There was a reason I couldn't see them through her bangs before. They were black, or midnight blue, or a dark, dark purple. But nonetheless, they were otherworldly. She said, "Our mother is worried." As someone who has always been interested in creepy stories, I knew what she was the second she looked at me through the door. I have never been one to believe in these things, as a staunch atheist and skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. I had written off many a ghost stories from family members and friends, eager to tell their tale. I didn't believe. Still, I could not rationalize my way out of this. I was standing with nothing but a thin wooden door between me and a black-eyed kid. There was no questioning what was right in front of me. I did not answer her. Slowly and silently I backed away from the door, Lucy still cowering at my ankles. She kept talking. "Just let us in and use your phone." I took another step back, and with that step the tone changed. At first she seemed polite, but when I took that second step back, she became commanding, almost hostile. "We're not going to hurt you. If we wanted to do that, we would have already broken in. Now, I'll ask you again. May we come in and use your phone?" Lucy snarled at the door. I inched backwards, though something inside me seemed to be slowly pulling me back towards the door. It wasn't a physical pulling, so much as a subconscious need to go back and let them in. I went into my room, covered up the window and locked the door, and sat in the dim light of the nightlight. I heard her call me back to the door once more, and then quiet. I didn't go back to sleep that night, and I haven't slept right since. I know from reading about the BEK that they don't come in without permission. I know they haven't hurt anyone, but I fear that I would have been the exception. But this lingering feeling of sadness, this dread when my house is silent at night, this fear of a knock at the door, tells me otherwise.
Last night was like any other night. I was switching between listening to music and watching YouTube videos, with one headphone in so I can hear my infant daughter if she cries. That way my wife can get a full night's sleep. She works at 4 a.m. at the hospital every day. But I decide to go lay down in the spare bed in the baby's room. Just as I dozed off, I heard a thumping coming from the front porch. Startled at first, I opened my eyes wide and scanned the room. Realizing it was most likely my cat scratching himself on the front porch, I dozed back off. And then again, the thumping. Damn cat. I got out of bed to run him off the porch, only to see he wasn't there anymore. Now that I was up again, I wasn't the least bit tired. I figured I'll just get some tea and check Facebook while I'm up. Maybe finish the web series I was watching on YouTube. A few minutes into the video, I felt the sudden urge to look up at the kitchen window. There they were. The tops of two short-statured people's heads, cresting the stairs just above my window frame. The people were just short enough to not see in the window, but I could see out. I heard no footsteps on my porch as my stomach turned. But the knock. The knock was a steady, hollow thump. The very same thump I had just blamed on my cat. Deciding it was best not to answer, I shut my laptop and crept by the door back to the baby's room. I assumed it was some of the people from the low-income housing across the road from me that were high or hiding from the cops, or maybe looking for my cousin who stays with me often and has many friends over there. The last thing I needed was to try to explain to two stoners that I was trying to sleep even though it was 2 a.m. It wasn't until I got to my daughter's room that the creepiness set in. The thump had moved from the kitchen to the bedroom windows, both windows, a room apart, thumping in perfect time. These stoners were going to wake up my daughter if I didn't run them off now. Pissed off, I went out to the kitchen, unlocked and opened the door, ready to run around to the side of the house and kick some little idiot's ass. It happened then. Standing there looking up at me were two 10 or 11-year-old boys. The feeling of dread and the smell of mold almost made me vomit. The smaller of the two then spoke. "May we use your telegraph?" Huh? I just stared blankly at these boys, horrified of what I then realized. Their eyes were pitch black. He asked again to use my telegraph. There wasn't a sound to be heard, no crickets chirping, no dogs barking, no cars driving by, nothing. I tried to play it cool and ignore the fact that he didn't say telephone, or phone, or cell. Anything that would have made sense of the situation, and calmly replied, "I don't have service at my house. Sorry." The expressions on their faces turned to rage as I finished my sentence. Swiftly I shut the door and locked it as quickly as I could, then stumbled back to protect my daughter. I picked her up from the crib and held her close. The fact that she didn't wake up freaked me out the most, but I managed to gather my senses enough to make sure she was still breathing and warm. Everything seemed okay with her. The thumping on the windows was back. I dropped to the floor as close to the wall as I could and held my little girl in my arms and wept like a child. I felt helpless and afraid. I lay there for what felt like hours and hours, crying and shaking until I heard it. My wife's alarm clock. The thumping stopped the instant the alarm went off, and I crept into the master bedroom with the baby. "What's wrong with you?" my wife asked. "I just had a bad dream," is all I could mutter out. "Okay, well, give me the baby so I can feed her before work." I handed my wife the baby, and she fed her like any normal day. I turned on every light in the house and made coffee for her. For some reason, just having her awake calmed my nerves enough to pretend like nothing happened. I walked her out to the car, nervously with the baby in my arms. I asked her not to leave until I was back in the house. She was put off by the request, but did so to humor me. Once I was safely in the house, I locked the door again. And in the house I sat horrified until she got home. I insisted we go to the next town over and stay the weekend at my brother's house. And here I sit, horrified while she sleeps in the guest room with my daughter. I'm afraid. And I'm sorry.
Let me preface this by saying, I am by no means a writer, just a domestic engineer living in North Texas. Also, I don't believe in paranormal ghosts, demons, or aliens or whatever. However, I did have an event happen to me this Halloween. I have to admit, it's had me scratching my head ever since. So it had been a slow trick-or-treat night in our neighbourhood that evening, which is pretty odd in itself. We usually have kids from different areas drop off in ours and constantly parade at our door. That night, I'd say we had no more than 8 to 10 groups of kids. It was around 9:30, and my husband and I were sitting in our family room watching some of the ghost shows based on, supposedly, actual events. Like I said, I don't believe in that kind of stuff, but I do like a good ghost story now and then, and it is Halloween after all. We hadn't had any activity at the door in over half an hour. It was getting late, so we decided to turn the porch light on and let our dog Chloe out of her crate. Chloe is an American bulldog and is very docile. We only put her in the crate because we were afraid she'd try and get out and play with all the other kids, and I didn't want to have to chase after her down the street. I also didn't want her scaring or intimidating the kids, because she can be a little scary. So I turned the outside light off, let Chloe out, and she followed me back to the couch and lay down on my feet. It was getting close to 10 PM when my husband decided he'd had enough fun for the night and was going to go upstairs, take a shower, and get ready for bed. After all, it was Thursday, and he still had to get up early for the next day. Our teenage son was out with his friends at the local haunted house and wasn't expected back for at least another hour or so. So that left me alone on the couch with Chloe. Now, just because I don't believe doesn't mean that those shows don't freak me out a bit. And being alone now, I have to say I was kind of on edge watching the TV. It wasn't long until I heard the upstairs shower turn on, when the light came on in the patio. Knock, knock, knock at the front door. My initial reaction was, what the hell? Really? It's almost 10. Go home. But soon an uneasy feeling came over me. Why the knock? Our doorbell glows in the dark, and without the porch light, it would have been extra obvious to everyone there. I paused. I couldn't really just ignore it. Our front door had a big glass panel, and everyone right by the door could easily see inside and know that I was just sitting there watching TV. It would have been rude for me not to answer. Just before I get up, knock, 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 again from the door. I glanced down at Chloe, but she was gone. My gaze followed her usual path to the front door, expecting her to be on her way there as she normally does. Nothing. She wasn't there. I stood up to look around the room and found her crouching by the back door, like she was wanting out. However, she needed to ask to go out like that. She always comes to lick my hand or puts her head on my knee. This was very out of character for her, and I have to say it heightened my anxiety. Chloe? Crate, I said. She just turned back to look at me like, hell no, lady. I ain't moving. I yelled up to my husband, but if he was already in the shower, I knew there was no chance of him hearing me. Knock, knock, knock. About the time a car drove by our street and cast enough light on the door for me to see the silhouettes of 2 small children through the glass. I instantly felt relief. It was just some kids, probably a couple off my neighbourhood on their way back home and wanted to stop by and show me their costumes or something. I headed for the door and looked back to make sure Chloe wasn't following. What a great watchdog, I thought I had to myself. She just sat there. I turned on the porch light when I got to the door, and sure enough I could see through the glass. It was a couple of pretty small kids. A little late for such young ones, I thought, and began to wonder about what kind of parents would let their kids run around the streets this late at night. I opened the door, enough to see where I could block Chloe's escape if she decided to grow some balls, which was only about 2 feet. What struck me immediately as odd was that the kids weren't wearing any costumes. They were wearing normal street clothes. Also, no customary trick or treat either. I began to feel very uneasy. It was a girl and a boy. The girl to my left was older, I'd say around 11 or 12. I could tell she was blonde, but I couldn't make out any distinct features, as our lights are from high above and on the columns at the front of the porch, so most of the light was coming from behind them. I had not opened the door wide enough for any of the light to come inside and hit them. The boy was younger, about a foot shorter, and between 8 or 9 I'd say, and looked to have light brown hair. The girl very politely spoke up. "Ma'am, can we please come inside and use your phone to call our mother?" As she spoke, something in the pit of my stomach was telling me that something was wrong. What kid, even at that age, doesn't have a cell phone of their own these days? I couldn't remember the last time I'd had anyone ask me to use my home phone. Hun? Don't you have a phone of your own that you can call your mum on? I asked this, and that is when things got really weird. Both kids turned to look at one another, as if they were going to say something, but neither ever spoke. They both turned back to me and the girl said, "Ma'am, my cell phone battery doesn't have any charge left in it. Can we please come inside and call our mother? We're alone out here, and my brother is scared." I have to admit, there were 2 competing feelings going on inside me. The first, that of a mother's heart and wanting to help these 2 small children get to their mother. The other, a sinking fear in my gut that was keeping the other feeling at bay. It was then I noticed that during the short conversation I'd already opened the door a few extra inches, which I was completely unaware of doing. I stopped. "Honey, why don't you give me your mother's number and I can call her myself?" Another pause, and they looked at each other again. After a short moment they turned back to me and the girl said, "Ma'am, my little brother has to use your bathroom. Can we please come inside whilst you call our mother?" And with that last statement, the little girl moved closer to the door, almost as if she was going to walk in. As she did, she stepped into the light coming from inside the house, and I got my first real good look at her. Solid, jet black eyes. That's all I could see. That motherly instinct was gone and replaced by terror I don't think I've ever felt before in my life. I could feel every hair on my arm and back of my neck standing at attention. I closed the door to where my face was just able to stick out. The little girl stopped again and pleaded, "Please, ma'am, we're really scared and alone out here. We have to come inside. Please, help us." Then, like on cue, both kids began to whimper and cry. That's when the fear took over, and I shut and locked the door. "I'll call your mum if you give me the number," I shouted through the door, "but I'm not letting you in my house." I could still see them standing there on the porch, just staring at me through the Bellevue glass pane. Part of me wanted to run upstairs to my husband, but the bigger part didn't want to lose track of where they were. That would have freaked me out even more, to know that they were not there. After what seemed like forever, but probably a few seconds, I decided to call my neighbour that lived across the street, as I made my way to the side table by our couch to get my phone. I glanced back to the door. Chloe was nowhere to be found. We later found her in the guest room under the bed. When I got my phone and started to look for his contact info, it was when the kids had stepped away from the door and had begun walking into the street. As they did, I walked to the door to get a better look of who they were and where they went, still not calling my neighbour. If you get close enough to the glass, you can see out enough detail to make out people's shapes, but you couldn't see much detail. Of course, standing that close to the door would make you pretty obvious to anyone looking in. From the door, I could see that the kids were standing under the street lamp nearest my house staring at me. As I lifted the phone to my ear after calling them, only then did the kids start walking down our street. I met my neighbour out under the lamp once he was out there, but the kids were nowhere to be seen. Like I said, I don't believe in any of this stuff, and had never even heard about black-eyed kids before talking to my friend. What I really think, what I have to think, is that these kids were just yanking people's chains on Halloween night. But I will say this for them, they were really, really good at it, and they scared the shit out of me and my dog, black-eyed kid or not.
It was a cold October evening, not too far off from Halloween. I remember sitting in my room playing the original Suikoden. The evening was slowly creeping by, so I decided to go to the corner store. It was only 3 blocks, shouldn't be much trouble, right? During my walk I see the normal. The occasional person putting up Halloween decorations, and kids playing in their yards. But this story is about something far more sinister. I remember seeing 2 teens about age 14 knocking on a door, asking to use a phone. Which of course I thought was weird because most teens these days have phones. As I kept walking, they stopped and stared at me for a short moment. I felt the blood in my veins chill. I felt so creeped out I hurried to the next block. The next block seemed fine, until I looked behind me and saw the 2 teens were following me. I took off sprinting to the store at this point. I saw the sign for the store, and relief washed over me. I opened the door and I told the cashier about what happened on the way here. He looked at me slightly creeped out, and told me a story about this happening to him in his hometown, and how they found him the day he left and asked for his help, in an emotionless voice. And he told me to never agree to help. He told me another story, but at that point I was no longer paying attention because they were standing at the door, asking to be let in. The cashier freaked out, and I locked the door. The teens never seemed to waver or leave. They wouldn't step away from the door. It had been an hour. The cashier and I were ready to fight our way out, but instead he took me out the back. The one teen came around the back just as the door shut behind us. "Can you help me?" is all he could say. He was closing in on us, and his eyes, they were black as a starless night. They were peering right into my soul. I couldn't help but gaze into his eyes. The terror. I can't remember too much of what happened next, but I do recall the sounds of a struggle. When I came to, the cashier was struggling with both teens. He was calling out to me for help. I ran towards them, grabbed him by his collar and pulled him between the 2, and knocking them over in the process. I didn't look back until I was near my house. The cashier was gone, but the teens were still following behind. I ran into my house, closed all the blinds, and turned the music up. I got lucky that day, but I'm not sure how long I can keep out of their grasp. I tried to find and thank the cashier for saving my life that day, but he didn't show up at work after that. I asked his boss, and he told me he called over the phone and quit. He said he was moving. To this very day, I sometimes feel the fear of those eyes, watching me as I drive to work. I sometimes will look out my window, and swear I see them watching my house from a couple blocks away, waiting for their next chance.
In early 2010, I was walking home from work and found myself escorting a young lady to her car. She asked me to escort her, and I was hoping that perhaps I'd get the chance to take her out on a drink or two, or maybe even get her number. No shit though, she looked really scared. I kept walking with her and was trying to get out of her what she was so worried about. She would only comment about some really creepy looking kids that were following her. Being that we were in downtown Seattle, this could amount to anything. So we kept walking and talking, and I looked behind us to see if the kids are anywhere near. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then she grabs my arm really hard and whispered, "That's them." They were about half a block in front of us, and standing there looking at her. So I do the prudent thing, which was to cross the street. I make sure I lock eyes with the big kid, and I keep in mind once I get to the lady's car, I'd give them an earful about being a couple of little shits for scaring a lone woman in a metropolitan area. I didn't get scared or anything, but did notice something strange. They didn't break eye contact with me. Mind you, I don't look like the kind of guy who you'd want to mess around with. Honestly, it's an unconscious front since I'm a bit shy, but my look reminds people of either a skinhead or a club bouncer. The black tanker boots and a bit of Van Dyke mixed in doesn't make me look like a people person either. People break eye contact with me constantly, and these two kids didn't. That was a red flag. I finally got the woman to her car and she thanked me. I made sure to tell her where the local police station was. That was only about 5 blocks away from where we were. She drove off, and I went over to see the kids. Just as I was approaching them, I locked eyes with the tallest one again. But that's when I noticed. His eyes were pitch black. I stopped in my tracks and did not know how to proceed, my mind being overwhelmed with information. This was wrong. I looked down at the other one. He had black eyes as well. I started to feel seriously uneasy. And even though it's not in my nature, I decided at that moment to just walk away. I turned around and left. I'd heard about the black-eyed kids, and there was no way in hell I was going to start a confrontation with one of those. I swear down, that's probably the scariest experience of my life. On March 4th, 2008, I had my one and only encounter with a black-eyed kid. Before my experience, I had never heard of anything having to do with their black eyes. I was 12. I was sitting outside of a hairdresser's in an old Chevy pickup, waiting for my mother to get her hair cut. About 15 minutes had passed, and I saw some kid walking back and forth along the sidewalk in front of my parked car. At first, I thought I recognized him as one of my friends from school, so I banged on the front windshield until he looked my way. When he turned, I realized it wasn't anyone that I knew. At this point, I wasn't scared at all. Not yet. The boy walked over to my side of the car and just stares. I get a good opportunity to look at him, and I am drawn to his midnight eyes. They freak me out. If you have never seen a black-eyed kid, you have no idea what to imagine. Pupils as black as the night sky. The boy whispers, "You must let me in." And then I lock the car and duck down into the space below the seats. I heard a light tapping on the window, but I ignored it. And after about 5 minutes he was gone. When my mother got to the car, she told me that a boy had gone to the window of the hairdresser's and had been asking my mother for her keys. She refused, and eventually he went away. I'm so happy nothing worse happened that day. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to Hellfreezer for helping me out with this video. Please remember to smash that like button and subscribe, as you won't want to miss what I have in store for you next. What are your thoughts on the black-eyed children? Who are they? What do they want? And what do you think will happen if you invite one in? Let me know in the comments section below. Remember that if you have had a creepy or paranormal experience that you wish to share, feel free to send it to my email, which you can find in the description. You can also follow me on Instagram and Twitter at @TheMortisMedia for some secret stuff you won't find anywhere else. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.